Hello and welcome wherever you're listening to and watching episode 4 of 2020 Coaching Convos, as usual, with me, Julie Crabb. So thank you for joining me on this second series called Passionately Curious. And this episode is where I'm exploring questions and ideas about the language and jargon of coaching. So I'm curious and I want clearer and deeper understanding for myself, also for you and for others. And so I'm reflecting on and aiming to make sense of what I've been taught and what I've learned and what I've adopted as a coach. And it's also important to me and the original purpose of the podcast, and it's now a podcast, to find ways that coaching can be made available to all who want to make use of it. So if you want to know more about the background to this and previous episodes, so where it all started, do drop back to Spotify to the audio only, and it's just 5 minutes, introduction to this second series. So in episode 3 last week, I walked deeper into the metaphorical labyrinth of this exploration into coaching language and jargon, and I focused on 3 particular phrases. And they were, I'm curious about, showing up, and holding space. And using a structured approach, I chunked down to more detail, looking at each phrase in terms of its context, its meaning, the potential problems with it, or what I called amber flags, alternatives to the phrases, some comments from some contacts of mine, and interpretation from AI. And I posed questions as usual at the end of the episode. And of the responses I received, I'd like to share this week those of Olufemi Xavier of Coach With Me Olufemi. And he was a guest on Series 1 of 2020 Coaching Convos, which you can listen to on Spotify. So in his voice note to me, he said, or at least I'll paraphrase or summarize bits of it, that for coaches, it's quite easy to default to the language used in our own circles as a kind of a shorthand. But what he helpfully did was took each of the phrases in turn. And in relation to the phrase, I'm curious about, he interestingly said that he uses it to kind of signal to the client that an unusual question is coming up, potentially with a social taboo. And I think the example he gave was around money. But this question is coming up without judgment and seeking an honest response from the client. In terms of the phrase showing up, Olufemi said he tends to replace it with something like, how do you experience that? Or how does it present itself? And he gets good response from clients using these alternative phrases. And so to holding space, well, Olufemi said he heard this phrase used in and outside of the coaching community. And he said that for him, it's more of a contracting or a practice concept. He's simply silent and he's listening well, rather than that it being something that he talks about or to his clients. And then finally, Olufemi summarizes in this sentence, and I'm going to see if I can play his voice note to you, because I think it will be good for you to listen to his voice.
So finally, your question for me as a coach, what responses have I experienced from clients to professional coaching language and jargon? Generally speaking, if it's something that I feel is more coaching jargon, you might say, I would either avoid it, put it into terms that are more kind of everyday, or I would kind of give a bit of an introduction beforehand, explain what I mean when I ask a particular question. And if it is one that's maybe more common or I come back to, then just over the coaching relationship, the person that I'm coaching, my client, would become more used to hearing that kind of question and therefore find it easier to answer it. But as I said, generally speaking, I make an effort not to use too much jargon, as it were, anyway, because you can just lose a bit of meaning within that. So I hope that was useful. It was probably a bit of a longer answer for you. But I do hope that there is something that can be of value on your next episode, which I'm very much looking forward to.
Yeah, so thanks to Olufemi of Coach With Me for his very valuable perspective of the 3 phrases explored in episode 3. Now, last week I said I would start to focus on guidance from a range of sources on how to avoid coaching language or jargon. You might remember, if you've been listening to the episodes, that the question of content, so what is said, over process, so what brings those things being said about, were mentioned. And if we today just focus on content, so what is said and the language used, how might we avoid unnecessary jargon so that we can increase the mutual understanding between coach and client and still have access in common to what is being conveyed? So I'm going to bullet point 8 key ideas of how to avoid jargon, just for comment and to expand on in the later episodes. So here we go. So number 1, as we've said before, we can simplify the language and define terms. So just simply asking for and providing definitions, which actually in themselves do say something of our and our clients' map of the world. And I've realised that's another term that could be explored. Secondly, we can listen actively using paraphrasing and asking clarifying questions. Thirdly, we can relate really strongly to the client's experience, so using their language and drawing analogies and metaphors that are relevant to the client and the conversation that's going on. Number 4, we can ask for feedback, so we can check in with the client. So we check understanding and also provide that opportunity for clients to ask questions. And then number 5, summarize understanding. And I find this particularly helpful, especially if we ask the client to do that summarizing. So part way through the session, once or twice, just to ask them to summarize where they perceive that the conversation has gotten to. And invariably, the client will express it in an entirely different way to the way in which I, as coach, might have expressed it. And it's much more valuable to the client to do it in that way. Number 6, use empathy and practice empathy. So recognizing the client's background and their knowledge level of coaching and adapting your communication style accordingly as a coach. Then the last 2 are really focused on the coach. So continuous improvement as a coach. So in our coaching review after each session, we think about how much jargon did we use in that session? How might we develop the way that we're seeking to gain clarity and understanding? How might our language be simplified? And then lastly, number 8 is peer feedback. And that could be through triad coaching, so that you've got an objective observer, and also just generally discussing the whole concept about jargon language with other coaches. So there we are, the start at least to some consideration of the means of avoiding coaching jargon. Now, I'd be really interested to hear your views on any aspects of this shorter episode, and to maintain a habit, though, to finish on just one key question this week. If you are a coach and if you are a client, what other methods have you used, or what other methods have you experienced being used to reduce jargon and to check understanding in a coaching session? And of course, my always for this episode question, what am I missing? What else? So let me know your thoughts. Next week, I'll be focusing on 3 different phrases which are used both in and beyond coaching conversations. And I think I'm just going to amend these right now, actually, to include, since I said it today, map of the world. So map of the world would be the first phrase to explore. And then the other 2 are starting to sound a bit of a gardening metaphor, maybe connected to the labyrinth, who knows? So the other 2 are digging deep and heavy lifting. So please share or repost this episode, subscribe if you enjoyed it, and tell me what you want to hear more about in 2020 Coaching Convos, Passionately Curious, with me, Julie Crabb. Till next time.